Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, a new military operations launched in Nigeria to stand between communities and extremist attacks after 162 people from a Muslim village are killed in an armed raid. We hear from our correspondent about how US troops' presence in the country will affect the landscape. Also, at the funeral of a Kenyan man killed in Russia's invasion of Ukraine, those left behind rail against the diplomatic silence and inertia of the hundreds of young Africans being funneled to the front lines of a war far away. And Cameroon's hoping that people living in Yaounde will help tackle the city's enormous waste problem by sweeping their own streets with donated cleaning kit. But first, Nigeria set up a new military operation to tackle extremism after 162 people were killed in a brutal attack on 2 Muslim villages this week. The raid on Woro and Nuku in Kwara State on Tuesday has been slammed as a stunning security failure. No one's claimed responsibility, but an army battalion's being deployed to Kwara State, which is increasingly being used as a hideout by armed groups. Operation Savannah Shield's mission will be to protect communities most vulnerable to attack. And as again made clear by this week's violence, that includes both Muslim and Christian Nigerians. The US has confirmed that it's also sent forces over to help the country tackle its complex security crisis, but some worry that Washington's oversimplification of Nigeria's problem could hamper the impact of its contribution. Sam Olakoya breaks it down for us.
After carrying out airstrikes on locations described as Islamic State camps in northwest Nigeria last December, it seems the United States is not done with its military mission in the country. The United States military agenda enters another phase with boots on the ground. The head of the US Africa Command, Davin Anderson, confirmed that a small team of US forces have been dispatched to Nigeria. The mission is to strengthen the mutual agreement between the United States and Nigeria in the fight against terror threats in the region. Nigerians are curious about more specific details of the US troop deployment. There is hardly any information about such important details, like when the troops arrived in Nigeria, their number, their location, how long they will be in the country, and crucially, what duties they will perform.
But of course, critics will want to question what is the latent function, what is the ulterior motive of the US being in Nigeria, putting boots on ground, no matter how small the contingent may be. Are they here genuinely to help Nigeria fight terrorism, or they have other, interests, access to Nigerian mineral resources and all of that? Of course, their presence again also can be read as undermining Nigeria's, sovereignty and all of that. But I think that in sum, we can say that military cooperation is allowed internationally, and the contingent that is in Nigeria does not pose any threat to Nigeria's sovereignty.
Of recent, attacks by jihadists and other armed groups have been unrelenting in Nigeria, with mass killings and mass abductions taking place in several parts of the country. The success of the US military intervention in Nigeria will be measured by how much it can stop these attacks and restore security in the country.
Now, clothes producers in Africa are breathing a sigh of relief after the US agreed to extend the AGOA trade deal, but they warn that doing so until the end of the year isn't enough. Clarice Fortuné with more.
Inside this factory in Nairobi, sewing machines are running at full speed. Workers cut, stitch, and pack clothes bound for the United States. Exports made possible by AGOA, a trade deal allowing duty-free access to the US market. The agreement, in place for 25 years, was due to expire last year, triggering anxiety across Africa's manufacturing sector. This week, American President Donald Trump announced a 1-year extension until the end of 2026. For factory owners, the news came as a relief, but only just.
This is like a big news for us. It's big news for the entire sub-Saharan AGOA benefiting countries. But at the same time, it's for a short while, but still is a big news.
When the deal lapsed, Exporters were forced to absorb new US tariffs to keep their buyers, putting pressure on cash flow and threatening thousands of jobs. For workers, the uncertainty was deeply felt on the factory floor.
We were worried. Even workers, most of them, majority, were sick because they had children in school.
AGOA supports tens of thousands of jobs across 32 African countries. But industry leaders say a one-year extension is not enough to secure long-term orders or investment. As negotiations continue, manufacturers warn the clock is already ticking again.
In Kenya on Thursday, a family buried a coffin for a son erased in a foreign war. One of the hundreds of Africans sent to the front lines in Ukraine, some forcibly recruited by the Russian army. Our regional correspondent spoke with Charles Waitaka's family.
There was no coffin, no body for these funerals. Charles Waitaka was a Kenyan engineer. He went to Russia to work there, and according to his mother, he was forced to join the Russian army. He was sent to the front line in Ukraine and stepped on a landmine. He died instantly. Neither the Russian army nor the Russian government informed his family. His mother found out on social networks. That's why it was important for her to organize this ceremony so that the family can start grieving.
So as a mother, it wasn't easy. So I asked him, now that you are going to war front, what do you know about war? Do you know you are going to face people who have been at war for over 30 years? He cried daily. Mommy, I would like to come back to Kenya. Things here are not good. I went to the Foreign Affairs office, so they told me that to get the body, it is impossible. Because once you die in war, you are left there. Nobody is there to collect the bodies.
According to the NGO Vocal Africa, which is helping these families to bring back their son, whether dead or alive, at least 500 Kenyan men joined the Russian military during the past year, and more are yet to fly to Russia. They say that they are now calling on the Kenyan government to investigate on the recruitment agencies in order to avoid more recruitments, and they are also calling on the Kenyan government to prevent more departures to Russia.
Well, DR Congo's President Felix Tshisekedi is in Washington this week. He'll be having sit-downs with officials there as a US-mediated peace deal meant to resolve the rebel conflict dividing his country struggles to achieve results on the ground. Emmett Livingston with more.
It's the first time President Felix Tshisekedi of the Democratic Republic of Congo has been in the US since early December when he signed the Washington Accords. This peace deal brokered by the Trump administration was meant to end the conflict with M23 rebels in eastern Congo who were backed by Rwanda. But progress implementing the deal has been painfully slow. This week, Tshisekedi met several senior US government leaders, including US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. While official US government statements have been thin on the ground, the Congolese presidency said that the meetings have focused on advancing the Washington Accords and on discussing critical minerals and US investments in Congo. Statements from leading US senators were much clearer, however. The chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, after meeting Tshisekedi, released a statement urging Rwandan troops to leave Congo and for the US to sanction Rwanda for its support of the M23. Meanwhile, on the ground, fighting has continued, especially in the province of South Kivu. And on Wednesday, the M23 claimed credit for a drone attack on the airport of Kisangani, a city in northern Congo.
While people living in parts of Yaounde have long spoken up about their exhaustion with the city's chaotic management of household rubbish, it's a problem that has become a persistent crisis. The companies given the contracts to manage the services say that they can only do so much without more money. So the government's handing out cleaning equipment to locals, hoping that they'll get in on the Cleaning Act. Our team sent us this report.
In many parts of Yaounde, locals want to see leaders better fund and figure out plans for managing municipal rubbish. The city is growing fast, but collection services can't keep up. Without enough public dumpsters, household rubbish often ends up in the streets.
There was supposed to be a rubbish bin here, but unfortunately there isn't. They cleared the roads of trash yesterday evening, and you can see how full it is again this morning. We live next door, so sometimes when you're at home, the unpleasant smells make it uncomfortable.
2 companies manage waste collection and disposal here. The main one is Hizakam, the Cameroon Hygiene and Sanitation Company. It processes rubbish at a landfill just outside Yaounde. 1,400 tons of garbage are trucked in every day. Hizakam blames uncollected trash in Yaounde streets on communities' habits. It is also said it can only do so much in the face of the government's 14 billion francs CFA worth of public debt.
When waste is produced, it is dumped at the first outlet, which complicates the task for Hizakam, which is forced to increase the frequency of truck visits in order to keep the city clean.
The government says it is trying to find a more long-term solution to the problem. Some 700 wheelbarrows, shovels, brooms and scrapers were recently distributed to the 7 councils in the city. The hope is that communities will use them as needed to help keep their own streets clean.
What the Ministry of Culture is doing this morning is contributing its part. I'd like everyone to join in this activity, because when the city's clean, the joy is collective. When the city's dirty, the shame is collective. That's what we need to remember.
Authorities' recent push for a cleaner sweep is partly motivated by Cameroon's preparations to host some high-profile international events this year, including the 14th Conference of Ministers of the World Trade Organization and a visit by Pope Leo XIV in April.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks very much for joining us, and do so again if you can. Till then, take care.
I told him that to go to Spain, he had to take the plane, but he didn't have the money. He said he'd take the boat. I told him I wouldn't allow it. I did everything to stop it from happening.
20 years ago, thousands fled Senegal for hopes of a better life in the Canary Islands. But the perilous journey meant their dreams turned into a living nightmare.
We all had friends or acquaintances who were lost at sea.
Our journalists met Saliou, a humanitarian worker who dedicates his life to these victims.
Today, there is a real feeling of anger towards the authorities who neglect this issue.
Faced with guilt and the fear of rejection, families are unable to grieve.
You see the stakes there. That's where we buried the dead. I think we cannot forget. We must not forget.
Watch Senegal's 2006 migrant crisis, revisited on France 24.